Love, Musangwe, time, Golgi tendon, electromagnetism, itch, dizzy, dream, smell, taste, hearing. Freedom, Junkidu, Zingi Quan, rotations and vibrations, light touch, lanceolate, fingertip, sensations, grip strength, organ stretch, oxygen intake, your heart. You know how you can detect you're breathing in oxygen? There's something inside your heart. Direction, proprioception. We have the ability to use logic and reason. Direction, just move over 3 feet. Air pressure, texture, hunger, vestibular, balance. Marines, ninja, tai chi, capoeira, aikido, muay thai, krav maga. Solidarity, texture, oxygen intake, vestibular, thirst, hunger, fatigue, coldness and pain. And eyesight and coldness and pain. Vestibular and coldness and pain. Krav Maga and coldness and pain. Coldness and pain. So Josephus was a revolutionary. Genetics and Genesis. It often and confidently has been asserted that man's origin can never be known, but ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. It is those who know little and not those who know much who so positively assert that this or that problem will never be solved by science. Charles Darwin, The Descent of Man. It is the ignorant that's so fucking confident. I don't know nothing, but I speak real loud about it. Mark Twain says that education is when you go from cocky ignorance to miserable uncertainty. And if you're smart, you'll enjoy that joke. Travel back into the human past, and the historical evidence is plentiful enough for the first couple of 100 years. And then it rapidly diminishes. At the 5,000 year mark, written records disappear altogether. 5,000 years, I only go back 4,000 years. Yielding to the wordless witness of archaeological sites. Going farther back, even these become increasingly rare over the next 10,000 years, fading to almost nothing by 15,000 years. I think humankind busted out of Africa 50,000 years ago, and we got to America 14,000 years ago. But they're saying that we can't even really know much past 15,000 years ago, the date of the first human settlements. Before that, people lived a nomadic existence based on hunting and gathering. They built nothing and left behind almost nothing of permanence, save a few stone tools and the remarkable painted caves of Europe. Travel on back for another 35,000 years, and you will have reached the 50,000 year mark, the time when the ancestral human population was still confined to its homeland somewhere in northeast Africa, but had begun to show the first signs of modern behavior. This is the point at which the modern human story begins, and written records exist for just the last 10% of it. 90% of human history seems irretrievably lost. You know, that's probably right. That's probably true. And I'm okay with that, frankly. I'm okay with that. If we can figure out the, last 1,000 years, 3,000 years, 4,000 years, I would be, super happy if we could figure out the last 4,000 years. Like exact, and try to make something of it. Try to understand what the hell is actually going on. Archaeology, I think, will always be sort of a generalized thing. But 3,000, 2,000, and the point of knowing 432 is just to see the progress of humanity, and then to be able to better record stuff and, don't repeat history. To learn from it. Keep traveling back in time to the earliest starting point in the human narrative, the period 5 million years ago when the ape-like creatures at the head of the human line of descent split from those at the head of the chimpanzee line of descent. The only physical evidence from throughout this period which saw the evolution from ape to human form is a handful of battered skulls and a few stone tools. No deep understanding, it might seem, could ever be gained of these two vanished periods, the 5 million years of human evolution and the 45,000 years of prehistory. But in the past few years, an extraordinary new archive has become available to those who study human evolution, human nature, and history. It's a record encoded in the DNA of the human genome and in the versions of it carried by the world's population. Geneticists have long contributed to the study of the human past, but are doing so with particular success since the full sequence of DNA units in the genome was determined in 2003. Why should the human genome, specifically shaped for survival in the present, have so much to say about the past as the repository of hereditary information that is in constant flux? The genome is like a document under ceaseless revision. Its mechanism of change is such that it retains evidence about its previous drafts, and these, they're not easily to interpret, provide a record that stretches deep into the past. The genome can therefore be interrogated at many different time levels. It can supply answers that reach back more than 50,000 years to the genetic Adam. So Adam and Eve did live, but there's a genetic Adam. 50,000 years ago, who was the first Adam to break out of Africa? A man whose Y chromosome is carried by all men alive today. So we do have a genetic Adam. It does go back to a genetic Adam. Or it can be queried about the events of a mere couple of centuries ago, such as Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the U.S., who had a secret family with his slave mistress, Sally Hemings. From Adam to Jefferson, the genome is helping researchers create a new and far more detailed picture of human evolution, human nature, and history. From the great darkness, a surprisingly full narrative is emerging. This new narrative of the human past rests on a solid foundation laid by paleoanthropologists and archaeologists, and anthropologists, and many other specialists. It can now be called new in the sense that genetic information now contributes to each of these traditional disciplines, and it's beginning to draw them together. This book describes those aspects of human evolution, nature, and prehistory that have been illuminated by genetic discoveries of the last few years. Readers who do not follow these fields closely may be surprised at the richness of the information in the new narrative. There exists no video of how apes slowly morphed into people, but a sequence of the salient events can, for the most part, be reconstructed. There's no map that records the dispersal of the new humans from their ancestral homeland, but researchers can now follow the path they took out of Africa and their migrations through the world outside. It's even possible to reconstruct some of the migrations. That's another way to see the dawn of man. It's even possible to reconstruct some of the social institutions that emerged as people made the transition from a nomadic way of life based on hunt and gathering to today's complex societies. Information from the genome has helped tell paleoanthropologists when humans lost their body hair and when they gained the power of speech. It had clarified for archaeologists their long quandary as to whether Neanderthals and modern humans peacefully interbred with each other or fought until the Neanderthals' extinction. It has furnished anthropology with information about human adaptation to cultural practices like cattle herding and cannibalism. The cascade of DNA data is even benefiting historical linguistics, though indirectly, as biologists apply the tree-building methods developed for genealogies to reconstructing the evolution of language. On the critical question of the ancestral human population of 50,000 years ago, the last group from which everybody alive today, 9 billion people, is descended, the techniques of paleoanthropology and archaeology are powerless to say anything about a people that has vanished without a trace. But geneticists, by rummaging around in the genome's rich attic, can fill in all kinds of unexpected detail. They can estimate how large the ancestral population was. They could say where in Africa it probably lived. They can put a date, though a rough one, on when language emerged. They can even infer in one instance what the first language sounded like, the first tailored clothes. We can estimate a date people started sewing their own clothes. Early humans may have used loose animal skins for millions of years, worn perhaps like a cape against the cold, but fabricated garments were a more recent invention. Archaeologists have never been able to determine when clothes were first worn because both the materials and the bone needles used to sew them are highly perishable. In the fall of 1999, Mark Stone King's son came home from school in Leipzig, Germany, with a note warning that a classmate had a case of head lice. Stone King, an American researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, read it as carefully as would any anxious parent. But as a geneticist long interested in human origins, his attention was drawn to a reassurance in the school note that lice cannot survive longer than 24 hours away from the warmth of the human body. I thought if that was true, then lice must have been spread around the world by human migrations. He says Stone King figured that if he could prove this were so, he would have discovered an independent confirmation of the migration pattern implied by human DNA. But after a few hours of library research, he realized that lice might hold in their DNA an even more interesting fact. the date when humans first wore clothing. The compilers of the book of Genesis were so exercised by the question of human nakedness that they included not just one but two accounts of how people came to seek modesty in clothing. In the first, Adam and Eve sewed themselves aprons of fig leaves after realizing their state of undress. In the second, the Creator himself tailored the errant pair coats of skins before expelling them into the world beyond Eden. Neither account gives due weight to the other interested party in the story of human clothing, the louse. Once, after all, in the days when human forebears were fully covered with hair, just like any other ape or monkey, the louse must have ranged freely from head to toe. When humans lost their body hair, the louse's domain shrank, confining it to the lonely island of hair that tufts absurdly from the human head. But it patiently bided in its time, and many millennia later, when people started to wear clothes, the head louse seized the chance to regain its lost territory by evolving a new variety, the body louse, that could live in clothing. The head and body louse closely resemble each other, except the body louse is larger and has claws specialized for grasping material, not shafts of hair. Stone King realized that he could date the invention of clothing if he could only figure out from variations in lice DNA the time at which the body louse began to evolve from the head louse. He collected head and body lice from the citizens of 12 countries around the world. From Ethiopia to Ecuador to New Guinea, he analyzed all the variations in a small segment of each head and body louse's genetic material and arranged each population's lice in a family tree. Knowing the rate at which variations accumulate on DNA over the centuries, he could then calculate the dates of the various forks or branch points in the tree. The branch point at which the body louse first evolved from the head louse turned out to be around 72,000 years ago, give or take several thousand years either way. Assuming the body louse evolved almost immediately after its new niche was available to it, then people first addressed their nakedness only in the most recent stage of their evolutionary history. It was at about this time, or a few thousand years later, the humankind perfected language and broke out of Africa to colonize the rest of the world. And it seems as though they had decided to get dressed for the occasion. So when did humans start wearing clothes? 72,000 years ago. So there you go. 72,000 years ago we started wearing clothes. 50,000 years ago we broke out of Africa. And then 14,000 years ago we got to America. So there's three important dates. That'd be my Christmas, is to think about the historicity, to think about the dawn of man, to think about the dawn of man, chapter 1. Until we have a good chapter 1 of the dawn of man, can we really build a civilization or enlightenment or any kind of superstructure on top of the house of sand? Well, we were born way back when, and then that's just it. No, there's more to it than that there, motherfucker. God clapped his hands, and there you have it. God farted, and here we are. What more do you need to know? That's enough for me. Look, Genesis says God farted, and we all got here. Didn't you say there's a butthole in the Milky Way? I did. There is a black hole in the Milky Way. Well, there you go. That's God's asshole, and he farted, and that's how the Big Bang came about. Einstein said that God doesn't play dice. If God doesn't play dice, then how come quantum mechanics fucking works? If God doesn't play dice, how'd they get that damn Hiroshima and Nagasaki bomb to work? If God doesn't play dice, then how can we have GPS and all this shit that quantum mechanics is fucking constructed? Laptops and computers and cell phones. Liars, lions, and tigers, and bears.